Jake woke to the sound of Lisa typing on her computer. The sun was just rising over the jungle, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He sat up in his sleeping bag and saw that his communications expert had been working all night. "Any luck with the translation?" he asked. Lisa rubbed her tired eyes. "Some progress. The creature's vocalizations definitely follow language patterns, but it's not like anything we've seen before. It uses harmonic frequencies as well as traditional sounds." Alex was already awake, studying readings on his scanner. "I've been monitoring the Guardian all night. It never moved more than 50 feet from the crystal. Never sat down, never seemed to rest." "Maybe it doesn't need to sleep," Pete suggested. He was making breakfast over their small camp stove, his tennis ball sitting. Nearby on a rock, Jake put on his boots and grabbed his binoculars. Through the trees, he could just make out the ruins in the distance. The crystal still glowed with its steady blue light, and the Guardian stood beside it like a statue. "I want to get closer today," Jake said. "See if we can learn more about both the creature and the crystal." "Is that wise?" Alex asked. "It made its position very clear yesterday. We didn't come this far just to turn around. There has to be a way to communicate with it." After breakfast, the team packed their equipment and moved closer to the ruins. This time, they approached from a different angle, hoping to get a better view of both the Guardian and the crystal. Jake set up his observation post behind a fallen wall about 200 yards from the Guardian. From here, he could see the creature, clearly without getting close enough to provoke it. "Look at how it moves," Alex whispered. "Every few minutes it walks in a complete circle around the crystal. Always the same path. Always the same speed." Lisa had her recording equipment ready. "It's also making sounds at regular intervals. Quiet ones like it's talking to itself." "Or to the crystal," Pete added. Jake studied the Guardian through his binoculars. Up close, he could see that its scales were not just armor, but seemed to have intricate patterns carved into them. Its 6 eyes moved independently, constantly scanning for threats. The 4 tentacles on its back swayed gently, like sea plants in a current. "It's beautiful," Alex said softly. "In a terrifying way." "Look at the crystal," Lisa pointed. Every time the Guardian completes a circle, the blue light pulses brighter for a moment. Jake watched the pattern repeat itself 3 times. "They're connected somehow. The Guardian isn't just protecting the crystal, it's interacting with it." Alex activated his deep scanner. "I'm reading some kind of energy field between them. Very faint, but definitely there." "Can you tell what it does?" "Not yet, but I think you're right about them being connected." They spent the morning watching and recording. The Guardian never varied its routine. Circle the crystal, pause to scan for threats, make quiet sounds toward the crystal, then circle again. It was like a dance that had been going on for centuries. Around midday, Jake decided to test the creature's boundaries. He stood up slowly, making sure the Guardian could see him, and took a single step forward. The reaction was immediate. The Guardian turned all 6 eyes toward him and made a deep rumbling sound. Its tentacles spread wide, and the clawed hands opened in what was clearly a threat display. Jake took a step back, and the Guardian relaxed. 50 feet, Alex noted. That seems to be its comfort zone. Let's see if it reacts the same way to all of us, Jake said. Lisa stood up next and took a step forward. The Guardian's response was identical. So was its reaction when Alex and Pete tried the same thing. "It's not personal," Pete observed. "It treats all of us the same." "Like a security system," Lisa added. programmed to keep everyone at a safe distance. Jake sat back down and thought about what they had learned. The Guardian was intelligent, but followed rigid patterns. It was connected to the crystal somehow, and it had been doing this job for a very long time. Alex, run a geological scan on this area. I want to know how old these ruins really are. Alex pointed his scanner at the nearest wall and waited for the results. When they came back, he whistled softly. These structures are at least 60,000 years old, possibly older. That's impossible, Lisa said. No civilization in our records goes back that far. Maybe we need to update our records, Jake replied. Alex continued his scans. The building materials are unlike anything we've seen. These blocks should have crumbled to dust long ago, but they're still structurally sound. The same technology that keeps the crystal running? Pete suggested. Possibly. Whatever civilization built this place, they were far ahead of us technologically. Jake watched the Guardian complete another circle around the crystal. And they left behind a protector to keep their secrets safe. As the day wore on, they gathered more data. Lisa managed to isolate several distinct sounds in the Guardian's vocalizations. Alex identified exotic elements in the crystal's energy output. Pete studied the engineering of the ruins and found construction techniques that seemed impossible, but despite all their scientific equipment and careful observation, they were no closer to understanding how to get past the Guardian. We could call for backup, Lisa suggested as they prepared to return to camp. The venture has enough firepower to deal with one creature. No, Jake said firmly. That thing has been protecting the crystal for thousands of years. We're not going to kill it just because it's doing its job. Then what do you suggest? Alex asked. Jake looked back at the Guardian, still standing faithfully beside its charge. We find another way. There has to be something we're missing. That evening, as they sat around their campfire, Pete absently bounced his tennis ball against a tree. The steady thump, thump, thump was oddly soothing after a day of tension. You know, Alex said thoughtfully, in all the time we watched that Guardian today, it never showed any signs of aggression beyond warning us away. It could have attacked, but it chose not to. Maybe it's not as hostile as we think, Lisa added. Jake poked at the fire with a stick. Or maybe it's just following orders. Protect the crystal, but don't harm visitors unless they pose a direct threat. Orders from whom? Pete asked, still bouncing his ball. Whoever built that place. The same people who programmed it to stand guard for 60,000 years. The team fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. In the distance, the crystal's blue glow was visible through the trees, pulsing steadily in the darkness. And beside it, Jake knew, the Guardian continued its endless vigil. Tomorrow they would try again. There had to be a way to communicate with the creature, to make it understand that they meant no harm. The crystal held secrets that could change everything for humanity, but only if they could find a way past its ancient protector. Jake fell asleep to the sound of Pete's tennis ball bouncing against the tree, wondering if the Guardian ever got lonely after all these centuries of solitude. Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he pushed through the thick jungle vines. The planet Kepler 442c was hot and humid, making every step feel like walking through soup. Behind him, 3 other humans followed in single file, their boots squelching in the muddy ground. "Are we getting close?" asked Lisa Ward, the team's communications expert. She carried a large backpack full of electronic equipment that beeped softly as they walked. Jake checked his scanner. The energy readings are getting stronger. Should be just ahead. Dr. Alex Carter, their xenobiologist, stopped to examine a strange purple flower. The plant life here is amazing. Some of these species don't match anything in our databases. Save the biology lesson for later, Doc, said Pete Collins, their engineer. He bounced a worn tennis ball in his hand as he walked. It was an old habit that helped him think. We need to find the source of those energy signals before dark. The team had been walking for 3 hours since leaving their shuttle. The Starship Venture waited in orbit above them, but Jake's small exploration team was on their own down here. Command had detected strange energy patterns coming from this jungle planet, and they needed to investigate. Jake pushed aside a curtain of hanging moss and stopped. In front of them stood the ruins of an ancient city. Massive stone blocks covered in strange symbols rose from the jungle floor. Vines and trees had grown through the structures, making them look like nature and civilization had become one. "Wow," whispered Lisa. "How old do you think this place is?" Alex pulled out his dating scanner. "These readings, this has to be at least 50,000 years old, maybe older." The team moved carefully through the ruins. Most of the buildings had collapsed long ago, leaving only scattered walls and broken statues. But as they walked deeper into the ancient city, Jake's scanner began beeping faster. "There are no energy sources close," he said. "Very close." They climbed over a fallen pillar and found themselves in what looked like the center of the city. Here, the ruins formed a perfect circle around a large open space, and in the middle of that space stood something that made them all stop and stare. It was a crystal structure, about 10 feet tall and perfectly smooth. The crystal was clear, but seemed to glow from within with a soft blue light. As they watched, pulses of energy flowed through it like lightning trapped in glass. The air around it hummed with power. "That's it," Jake said quietly. "That's what we came to find." Lisa set down her equipment and began scanning. "The energy output is incredible. Whatever this thing is, it's been running for a very long time." Alex approached the crystal slowly. "The craftsmanship is amazing. Look at how perfectly shaped it is. No tool marks, no joints. It's like it was grown rather than built." Pete bounced his tennis ball absently as he studied the structure. "What do you think it does?" "Could be a power source," Jake said. "Or maybe some kind of computer. We need to get closer and—" The ground shook. At first, Jake thought it might be an earthquake. But then the shaking came again and again in a steady rhythm. Like footsteps. Very large footsteps. "Something's coming," Lisa whispered. The sound grew louder. Trees crashed in the distance. Birds flew from their nests crying in alarm. Whatever was approaching was massive. Jake drew his weapon, though he doubted it would do much good against something that could shake the ground with its footsteps. Everyone stayed together, back toward the ruins, but before they could move, it appeared, the creature rose from behind the far edge of the ruins like a mountain coming to life. It stood at least 30 feet tall, with a body covered in thick, armored scales that gleamed like metal. Its head was huge and reptilian, with 6 glowing eyes arranged in 2 rows. Long, muscular arms ended in clawed hands, while 4 tentacle-like appendages writhed from its back. But it was the intelligence in those 6 eyes that made Jake's blood run cold. This was no simple beast. This creature was thinking, watching, judging. The beast stepped into the circle of ruins with surprising grace for something so large. Each footstep left deep prints in the stone floor. It moved slowly but with obvious purpose, positioning itself between the humans and the crystal. Then it spoke. The sound that came from the creature's throat was like nothing Jake had ever heard. It was part roar, part song, part electronic static. But somehow he understood that it was a warning. "It's protecting the crystal," Alex whispered. Jake held up his hands, showing that he carried no weapons. "We come in peace," he called out, though he doubted the creature understood English. The beast tilted its massive head, studying them. Then it spoke again, louder this time. The sound echoed off the ruined walls and made the ground vibrate under their feet. Lisa was frantically working with her equipment. "I'm getting organized sound patterns. This might be language." "Can you translate?" Jake asked, not taking his eyes off the creature. "I need more time. The structure is unlike anything in our databases." The beast took a step forward. Its 6 eyes focused on Jake with an intensity that made him feel like an insect under a microscope. When it spoke again, the meaning was clear, even without translation. "Stay back." Pete had stopped bouncing his tennis ball and was gripping it tightly. "What do we do, Lieutenant?" Jake slowly backed away, motioning for his team to do the same. "We retreat. Set up camp at a safe distance and figure out our next move." The creature watched them leave, but made no move to follow. It simply stood, guard over the crystal, as Jake suspected it had been doing for a very long time. As they made their way back through the ruins, Alex looked over his shoulder at the massive guardian. "Did you see how it moved? The intelligence in its eyes? That's no ordinary animal." "Whatever it is," Jake said, "it's been protecting that crystal for who knows how long. And it's not going to let us just walk up and take it." They set up their temporary camp 2 miles from the ruins, close enough to monitor the situation but far enough to avoid provoking the Guardian. As night fell over the jungle planet, Jake stared toward the ruins and wondered what secrets that crystal held and why such a magnificent creature would dedicate its life to protecting them. Tomorrow they would have to find a way past the Guardian. But tonight, Jake could only wonder if they were the first humans to encounter this ancient protector, or if others had tried before them and failed. The crystal's blue glow was visible even from their distant camp, pulsing steadily in the darkness, like a heartbeat that had been beating for thousands of years. The third day started with frustration. Jake and his team had spent hours trying different approaches to communicate with the Guardian, but nothing worked. Hand signals, light patterns, even Lisa's attempt to mimic the creature's vocalizations had all failed. "It's like talking to a wall," Pete complained as they took a break for lunch. He sat on a fallen log, bouncing his tennis ball against the ground. "Not a wall," Alex corrected. "Walls don't think. That Guardian is definitely intelligent. It's just not interested in talking to us." Jake bit into his ration bar and watched the distant figure of the Guardian through his binoculars. The creature was going through its routine again, circling the crystal with mechanical precision. "Maybe we're approaching this wrong," he said. "We're trying to communicate like humans, but that creature has been alone for thousands of years. It might have forgotten how to interact with other beings." "Or maybe it never knew how," Lisa suggested. "If it was created to be a guardian, social skills might not have been part of its programming." Pete's tennis ball hit a rock and bounced at an odd angle, rolling toward the ruins. He got up to retrieve it, but Jake held up a hand. "Wait," Jake said quietly. Through his binoculars, he could see the Guardian had stopped its patrol. All 6 of its eyes were focused on something. Following its gaze, Jake saw Pete's tennis ball rolling slowly across the open ground between them and the ruins. The Guardian tilted its massive head, watching the ball's movement with what looked like intense curiosity. "It's tracking the ball," Alex whispered. The tennis ball finally came to rest about 30 feet from the Guardian. For a long moment, the creature just stared at it. Then, very slowly, it took a step closer. "Don't move," Jake told his team. "Nobody move." The Guardian approached the ball carefully, its 6 eyes fixed on the small yellow object. When it was close enough, it extended one of its tentacles and gently touched the ball. The ball moved slightly under the tentacle's touch, and the Guardian jerked back as if startled. But then curiosity seemed to win over caution. The creature reached out again, this time deliberately pushing the ball with its tentacle tip. The ball rolled a few feet. The Guardian watched its movement with what Jake could only describe as fascination. "It's never seen anything like that before," Alex breathed. "Or it has," Lisa said, "but not for a very long time." The Guardian pushed the ball again, harder this time. It rolled further, and the creature actually made a sound. Not the threatening rumble they had heard before, but something softer, almost pleased. "Pete," Jake said slowly, "I need you to move very carefully toward your ball. Don't make any sudden movements." "Are you crazy?" Pete whispered. "Trust me." "I think we just found our way to communicate." Pete stood up slowly, his hands visible and empty. The Guardian immediately focused on him, but this time there was no threat display. Instead, it seemed curious about what Pete would do. Pete took a step forward. The Guardian watched but didn't move to stop him. Another step. Still no reaction. When Pete reached the 50-foot boundary where the Guardian had always shown aggression before, he stopped. The creature was only 20 feet away now, close enough that Pete could see the intricate patterns carved into its scales. "Now what?" Pete called back softly. "Ask for your ball back," Jake suggested. Pete felt ridiculous, but he pointed at the tennis ball and then at himself. "That's mine," he said clearly. The Guardian looked at Pete, then at the ball, then back at Pete. After a moment that felt like hours, it gently pushed the ball toward him with its tentacle. The ball rolled to Pete's feet. He picked it up slowly, never taking his eyes off the Guardian. "Thank you," he said. The Guardian made that soft sound again. Pete looked back at his teammates, then at the massive creature watching him. Taking a deep breath, he gently tossed the ball back toward the Guardian. The ball bounced once and rolled to a stop near the creature's feet. The Guardian stared down at it, then up at Pete. Then it carefully pushed the ball back to him. "It's playing," Lisa whispered in amazement. "It's actually playing." For the next hour, Pete and the Guardian played the simplest game in the universe. Pete would roll or toss the ball, and the Guardian would send it back using its tentacles. Sometimes the creature would push it too hard, and the ball would fly past Pete, rolling into the jungle. The Guardian would make a sound that seemed almost apologetic. Jake watched through his binoculars, fascinated by what he was seeing. The Guardian's entire posture had changed. The rigid, threatening stance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost playful. Its tentacles moved with gentle precision, and its eyes seemed brighter somehow. "Look at the crystal," Alex said suddenly. Jake shifted his focus to the crystal structure. The blue glow that had been steady for days was now pulsing in a different pattern, faster, more energetic. "The Guardian's emotional state is affecting it," Lisa observed. "The energy readings are completely different." "Emotional state?" Jake asked. "Look at it," Alex said. "That creature is happy, probably for the first time in centuries." After an hour of play, Pete was getting tired. He sat down cross-legged on the ground, the tennis ball in his lap. The Guardian watched him curiously. "I think we need to take this slow," Pete called back to his team. "I don't want to break whatever connection we've made." Jake agreed. They spent the rest of the day observing as Pete and the Guardian continued their simple interactions. Sometimes they played with the ball. Sometimes Pete would just sit and talk, even though he knew the Guardian couldn't understand his words. The creature seemed to enjoy the sound of his voice. As evening approached, Pete finally stood up to leave. The Guardian made a sound that was clearly disappointed. "I'll come back tomorrow," Pete promised, holding up the tennis ball. "We'll play again." The Guardian watched him walk away, then returned to its position beside the crystal. But something had changed. The mechanical precision of its patrol was gone. Now it moved more naturally, stopping frequently to look in the direction Pete had gone. Back at camp, the team discussed what they had learned. "It's been alone for so long," Alex said. "Thousands of years without any contact with another thinking being. The loneliness must be incredible. But why did it respond to Pete and not to us?" Lisa asked. Jake thought about it. "Maybe because Pete offered something instead of trying to take something. We've been focused on the crystal, but Pete gave the Guardian something it needed more than anything." "What's that?" Pete asked. "Friendship," Jake replied. That night, as Jake lay in his sleeping bag, he could see the crystals glow through the trees. But now the light seemed different somehow. Warmer, maybe. Or perhaps that was just his imagination. Tomorrow, they would continue building the relationship Pete had started. Jake had a feeling that the key to understanding both the Guardian and the crystal lay not in their technology, but in something much simpler. Sometimes, the most complex problems had the simplest solutions. And sometimes, all it took was a tennis ball and the willingness to play. Pete approached the ruins the next morning with his tennis ball in hand and butterflies in his stomach. He wasn't sure if yesterday's breakthrough had been real or just a lucky accident. But as soon as he came into view, the Guardian turned toward him and made that soft, welcoming sound. "Good morning," Pete said, feeling less foolish than he had the day before. The Guardian tilted its massive head as if listening. Then it did something unexpected. It moved away from the crystal, walking toward Pete until it reached the invisible boundary it had maintained for so long. Pete stopped at his usual spot about 20 feet away. The Guardian was close enough now that he could see his reflection in its 6 eyes. This close, the creature was even more magnificent than he had realized. The scales that covered its body weren't just armor, they were works of art, each one carved with delicate patterns that seemed to tell a story. "You're beautiful," Pete said softly. The Guardian made a low humming sound and extended one of its tentacles toward the tennis ball in Pete's hand. Pete gently tossed the ball. The Guardian caught it with surprising delicacy, holding it carefully. Between 2 tentacle tips, it examined the ball closely, turning it over and over as if memorizing every detail. Then it did something that made Pete's heart skip. Instead of pushing the ball back along the ground, the Guardian gently tossed it back to him through the air. Pete caught the ball and laughed with delight. "You're learning!" Behind him, he could hear Jake and the others setting up their observation equipment. They had all come to watch today's interaction, but they stayed well back to avoid disturbing the delicate relationship Pete was building. For the next 2 hours, Pete and the Guardian played increasingly complex games. They started with simple tosses back and forth, but gradually the Guardian began adding variations. Sometimes it would bounce the ball off the ground first. Sometimes it would catch it and hold it for a moment before throwing it back, as if considering its options. The most amazing moment came when the Guardian accidentally threw the ball too high. Pete had to jump to catch it. And when he did, the Guardian made a sound that was unmistakably laughter. "It has a sense of humor," Pete called back to his team. It's showing creativity, too, Alex observed. Look at how it's modifying the games. On its own. Lisa was monitoring the crystal's energy output. The patterns are becoming more complex, more varied. It's like the crystal is responding to the Guardian's improved mood. Jake watched through his binoculars as Pete sat down for a rest. The Guardian immediately settled down as well, folding its legs under itself in a surprisingly graceful motion. The two beings sat facing each other in comfortable silence. They look like old friends, Jake murmured. After a while, Pete started talking to the Guardian about his life. He told it about Earth, about the stars, about his job as an engineer. The Guardian listened intently, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to encourage him to continue. I've always wanted to explore space, Pete said, bouncing the ball gently between his hands. Ever since I was a kid. My dad used to take me to watch shuttle launches, and I knew that someday I wanted to be up there among the stars. The Guardian made a questioning sound. You want to know about my dad? Pete interpreted. He was a teacher. He taught me that the best way to solve any problem is to try to understand it first. Don't fight it, don't force it. Just try to understand. The Guardian's 6 eyes focused on Pete with intense interest. He also taught me that everyone needs friends. Even the strongest, smartest people get lonely sometimes. Pete looked up at the towering creature. I bet you've been lonely for a long time. The Guardian made a sound that was unmistakably sad. Pete stood up slowly and took a step forward. The Guardian tensed slightly but didn't move away. Another step. Still no aggressive reaction. When Pete was close enough to touch the creature, he stopped and held out his hand, palm up. The Guardian looked at his hand for a long moment, then gently extended one tentacle tip to touch Pete's palm. The contact lasted only a second, but it changed everything. Pete felt a brief sensation that wasn't quite telepathy, but wasn't quite normal either. For just a moment he sensed the Guardian's emotions. Loneliness so deep it was like an ocean, determination worn smooth by countless years, and now, for the first time in centuries, hope. The Guardian pulled back its tentacle and made a complex series of sounds. Lisa's equipment went crazy, picking up harmonic frequencies that formed distinct patterns. It's trying to communicate, Lisa called out excitedly. Real communication, not just emotional responses. Pete listened carefully to the sounds, wishing he could understand. The Guardian seemed to realize his confusion and tried again, this time pointing with one tentacle toward the crystal. You want to tell me about the crystal? Pete guessed. The Guardian made an affirmative sound and walked toward the glowing structure. It gestured for Pete to follow. Pete looked back at his team. Jake gave him an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Pete walked with the Guardian toward the crystal that had been forbidden to humans for so long. Up close, the crystal was even more impressive. It stood 12 feet tall and seemed to contain swirling galaxies of light. As Pete watched, he could see patterns forming and dissolving in the blue glow, like thoughts made visible. The Guardian placed one hand on the crystal's surface and made a long, complex vocalization. The crystal's light pulsed in response, and suddenly Pete could hear something that sounded almost like music. It's singing, he whispered. The Guardian turned to Pete and made what sounded like an invitation. It wanted Pete to touch the crystal, too. Pete hesitated. This was clearly something important, maybe even sacred to the Guardian. Are you sure? The Guardian made an encouraging sound and gently guided Pete's hand toward the crystal surface. The moment Pete's fingers touched the smooth surface, his mind exploded with images and sensations. He saw the ruins as they had been 60,000 years ago, a magnificent city of impossible beauty. He saw the people who had built it, tall, graceful beings with faces full of wisdom and sadness. And he saw the Guardian, not as it was now, but as it had been then. One of those graceful beings, volunteering for a transformation that would let it protect their greatest treasure for as long as necessary. The vision faded, leaving Pete gasping and staggered. The Guardian steadied him with its tentacles, making concerned sounds. "You were one of them," Pete said in amazement. "You were one of the people who built this place." The Guardian made a sound of confirmation tinged with ancient sorrow. Pete looked at the magnificent creature with new understanding. This wasn't just a Guardian protecting a relic. This was the last member of an extinct civilization, keeping a promise made in the final days of his people's existence. "What are you protecting?" Pete asked gently. The Guardian touched the crystal again, and Pete saw more images. The crystal contained everything, the entire knowledge and culture of the Guardian's people, preserved against the day when someone worthy would come to claim it. "How long have you been waiting?" Pete asked. The Guardian's response needed no translation. "Too long. Far too long." Pete reached out and gently touched the Guardian's scaled arm. "You don't have to wait alone anymore." Back at the observation post, Jake watched the interaction between Pete and the Guardian with growing excitement. Whatever was happening at the crystal, it was clearly a breakthrough. The energy readings were off the charts, and both Pete and the Guardian seemed to be communicating on a level that went beyond language. For the first time since they had discovered this place, Jake began to believe they might actually succeed in their mission. But more than that, he began to understand that their mission was bigger than they had ever imagined. They weren't just explorers trying to understand an alien artifact. They were witnesses to the end of one story and the beginning of another. That evening, Pete sat by the campfire with his teammates, trying to explain what he had experienced at the crystal. The words felt inadequate for describing the flood of images and emotions he had received. "It was like watching a movie," he said, "but I could feel everything the Guardian felt. The sadness when his people were dying, the determination to keep their promise, the loneliness of all those centuries alone." Jake leaned forward. "Tell us about his people. What were they like?" Pete closed his eyes, trying to remember the visions clearly. "They called themselves the Zephyrians. They were tall and elegant, with long limbs and faces that seemed to glow with inner light. But it was their minds that made them special. They could share thoughts and emotions directly with each other." "Telepaths?" Alex asked. "More than that. They experienced everything together. When one of them learned something new, they all learned it. When one felt joy, they all felt joy. They were like a single vast mind spread across millions of individuals." Lisa looked up from her data analysis. "That explains the crystal's complexity. If they shared all knowledge instantly, their collective intelligence would be incredible." "But something went wrong," Pete continued. "A plague, maybe, or some kind of genetic breakdown. They started losing the ability to connect with each other. One by one, they became isolated in their own minds." Jake stared into the fire. "That must have been terrifying for them. Like going blind and deaf at the same time." "Worse," Pete said. "Imagine if you suddenly couldn't speak to anyone ever again, couldn't share your thoughts or feelings. They were dying not just physically, but spiritually. Alex was taking notes as fast as he could write. So they created the crystal to preserve their collective knowledge? Pete nodded. Everything they had ever learned, every thought they had ever shared, every piece of art or music or poetry they had created, it's all in there. The crystal is like a library containing the entire heritage of their civilization. And the Guardian? Jake asked. Pete looked toward the ruins, where the crystal's blue glow was visible through the trees. His name was Kethvar. He was a scientist, a philosopher, and a volunteer. When they realized their time was ending, someone had to stay behind to protect the crystal. Kethvar offered to undergo a transformation that would let him live long enough to find worthy inheritors for their legacy. How long has he been waiting? Lisa asked softly. 63,417 years, Pete replied. He's been counting. The team fell silent, trying to comprehend that span of time. Jake thought about what it would be like to stand guard for 60,000 years, watching civilizations rise and fall while fulfilling a promise to people who had been dead for millennia. Have others tried to claim the crystal before? Alex asked. Pete's expression darkened. Yes, dozens of different species over the centuries, but they all tried to take it by force. The Zephyrians built safeguards into the crystal. It won't release. It's knowledge to anyone who shows aggression or greed. What kind of safeguards? Jake asked. If someone tries to take the crystal by force, it shuts down completely. All the knowledge is lost forever. Kethavar's job isn't just to guard the crystal physically. He has to evaluate potential inheritors and decide if they're worthy. Lisa looked up from her equipment. That's why he responded to Pete's friendship. He wasn't just lonely, he was testing us. Jake began to understand the magnitude of what they had stumbled into. We're not just explorers anymore. We're being evaluated as potential inheritors of an entire civilization's knowledge. The question is, Alex said, do we pass the test? Over the next several days, Pete continued his daily visits with Kethavar. Each session brought new revelations as the Guardian shared more of his people's history through the crystal's visions. Pete learned about Zephyrian science, which was based on harmony rather than dominance. They didn't fight against natural forces. They learned to work with them. Their technology was grown rather than built, shaped by understanding the deep patterns that governed all matter and energy. He saw their art, which existed in dimensions humans couldn't even perceive. Music that played with time itself, paintings that showed the connections between all living things, poetry that could only be truly appreciated by minds that shared direct emotional links. But most importantly, Pete began to understand what the Zephyrians valued most: compassion, wisdom, and the willingness to put the welfare of others before personal gain. They weren't perfect, Pete explained to his team after one particularly intense session. They made mistakes, had conflicts, struggled with the same kinds of problems we face, but they learned to solve those problems through understanding rather than force. Sounds like an ideal worth striving for, Jake said. Meanwhile, Lisa had been working on establishing communication with Kethvar using the harmonic patterns she had recorded. She had made remarkable progress, identifying basic concepts and emotions in the Guardian's vocalizations. I think I can set up a simple translation system, she told Jake. Nothing fancy, but enough for basic conversation. Alex had been studying the biological data from Kethvar's transformation. The process that changed him was incredibly sophisticated. They didn't just extend his life, they enhanced his physical and mental capabilities while maintaining his essential personality. Could the process be reversed? Jake asked. Alex looked uncertain. Maybe. The Zephyrians were far ahead of us in biotechnology. But why would you want to reverse it? Because he's been alone for 60,000 years, Pete said firmly. If we can find a way to give him back some kind of normal life, we should. Jake was beginning to see the shape of a solution to their situation, but it would require careful planning and a leap of faith that would test everything they believed about humanity's place in the universe. On the 7th day since Pete's first contact with Kethvar, something extraordinary happened. As Pete approached the ruins for his daily visit, he found the Guardian waiting for him with what looked like a gift. It was a small crystal, similar to the large one, but only about the size of Pete's fist. It glowed with the same blue light, but softer, more personal. Kethvar offered the crystal to Pete with obvious ceremony. When Pete touched it, he immediately understood its purpose. It was a communication device, attuned specifically to Pete's mind. Through it, he could share thoughts and emotions directly with the Guardian. For the first time in over 60,000 years, Kethvar was no longer alone with his thoughts. The moment their minds connected, Pete was overwhelmed by the Guardian's gratitude. It poured through the link like warm sunshine, carrying with it the desperate relief of someone who had finally found a friend after an eternity of solitude. But beneath the gratitude, Pete sensed something else. Hope. Kethvar believed that humanity might be the species his people had been waiting for. The species worthy of inheriting the Zephyrian legacy. Now came the real test. Pete and his team would have to prove that humanity deserved that trust, and they would have to find a way to do it without betraying the friendship they had built with the last guardian of a lost civilization. With the communication crystal, everything changed. Pete could now speak directly with Kethvar, sharing thoughts and emotions in ways that words could never convey. The Guardian's relief at finally having someone to talk with was so intense that Pete sometimes had to break the connection just to catch his breath. It's like he's been holding back 60,000 years' worth of conversation, Pete told his teammates. The loneliness was eating him alive, but he couldn't abandon his duty. Through their mental link, Pete learned the full truth about the crystal and what it contained. The Zephyrian legacy wasn't just knowledge, it was wisdom. The difference, Kethvar explained, was crucial. Knowledge could be stolen or misused. Wisdom had to be earned through understanding and growth. The crystal would only release its contents to a species that had proven they could handle the responsibility that came with such power. What kind of responsibility? Jake asked. Pete closed his eyes, accessing the memories Kethvar had shared with him. The Zephyrians' technology could solve almost any problem. Unlimited clean energy, instantaneous travel between stars, the ability to heal any disease or repair any injury. But they also learned that such power could corrupt those who weren't ready for it. So they set up this test, Alex said. Leave the crystal with a guardian who would evaluate any species that found it. Not just evaluate, Pete corrected. Kethvar has been waiting for a species that would treat him as a friend rather than an obstacle to overcome. The Zephyrians believed that any species capable of showing compassion to their guardian would be capable of using their legacy wisely. Lisa looked up from her translation work. Have we passed the test? Pete was quiet for a moment, consulting with Kethvar through their mental link. He's impressed with how we've treated him, but he needs to see more. The test isn't just about our team. It's about humanity as a whole. What does that mean? Jake asked. He wants to meet more humans. He needs to understand our species, our values, our potential for both good and evil. Only then can he decide if we're worthy of the Zephyrian inheritance. Jake felt a chill of responsibility. The decision he made next could determine the future of human civilization. He could call for backup from the venture, bring down more personnel for Kethvar to evaluate. But what if humanity failed the test? What if the Guardian decided humans weren't ready for such power? There's something else, Pete said quietly. The process of transferring the crystal's contents will end Kethvar's guardianship. He's been sustained by his connection to the crystal for all these years. When that connection is broken, he'll die, Alex finished. Pete nodded. He's ready for it. More than ready. He's been holding on to fulfill his promise. But he's tired, Jake. 60,000 years tired. But you said the transformation process might be reversible. Jake protested. Maybe. But Kethvar doesn't want it reversed. He wants to join his people in whatever comes after death. He's been waiting for that reunion as much as he's been waiting to fulfill his duty. Jake stared toward the ruins, where the crystal's glow seemed brighter than usual. So if we accept the inheritance, we lose our friend. And if we don't accept it, Lisa added, humanity loses the greatest gift any species has ever been offered. The team spent the rest of the day in somber discussion. The weight of the decision was crushing. They were 4 humans on a distant planet, being asked to make a choice that would affect their entire species. That evening, Jake made his decision. We call the venture. I want Captain Rodriguez and the senior staff down here tomorrow. If Kethvar is going to evaluate humanity, he should meet our best representatives. What if they fail the test? Alex asked. Then we'll have learned something important about ourselves, Jake replied. The next day, a shuttle landed near their camp carrying Captain Maria Rodriguez and 5 of her senior officers. Jake had briefed them during the flight down, but seeing Kethvar in person was still a shock. My God, breathed Dr. Elena Santos, the ship's chief medical officer. He's magnificent. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, her bearing military but respectful. We're honored to meet you, Kethvar. Lieutenant, Morrison has told us about your people and your vigil. Kethvar studied the newcomers with his 6 eyes, then spoke through Pete's translation. He says he's pleased to meet leaders of humanity. He wants to understand how we make decisions, how we treat those under our command, how we handle conflicts. What followed were 3 days of intense interaction. Kethvar questioned the humans about everything, their history, their values, their fears and hopes. He was particularly interested in humanity's conflicts and how they had learned to resolve differences without destroying each other. Captain Rodriguez spoke honestly about humanity's wars and mistakes, but also about their capacity for growth and learning. Dr. Santos shared examples of human compassion and the drive to heal rather than harm. The other officers contributed their own perspectives on human nature. Kethvar listened to everything, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting examples. Pete served as translator for the complex discussions, marveling at the Guardians' deep intelligence and wisdom. On the 3rd day, Kethvar made his decision. He says humanity shows great promise, Pete translated, but we're still young as a species. We have the capacity for both great good and great evil. Jake felt his heart sink. We failed the test. No, Pete said, consulting with Kethvar again. We passed, but with conditions. The Guardian's proposal was unprecedented. Instead of simply transferring all Zephyrian knowledge to humanity at once, he would establish a gradual process. Humans would gain access to the crystal's contents slowly, as they proved they could handle each new level of responsibility. It's like a university, Pete explained. We'll learn step by step, earning each advancement through demonstration of wisdom rather than just intelligence. And who would oversee this process? Captain Rodriguez asked. Pete smiled. Kethvar. He's willing to remain as guardian and teacher, helping humanity grow into the inheritance we're being offered. But there was a catch. The process would require a permanent human presence on the planet. A team would have to stay behind to work with Kethvar, learning Zephyrian knowledge and passing it on to the rest of humanity at a responsible pace. Jake knew immediately who that team would be. "We'll stay," he said simply. "This is our discovery, our responsibility." Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I'll recommend to command that we establish a research station here. This could be the most important scientific project in human history." That night, as they celebrated their success, Pete sat with Kethvar beside the crystal. Through their mental link, he could sense the Guardian's profound relief. After 60,000 years, his vigil was changing from one of lonely waiting to one of active teaching. "Are you sure about this?" Pete asked. "You could have joined your people long ago if you'd just let the crystal go dark." Kethvar's response came tinged with warmth and determination. He had made a promise to find worthy inheritors for his people's legacy. But now he had found something more. A new people to care for, to guide, to watch grow from promising youngsters into wise adults. For the first time in millennia, Kethvar was looking forward to the future instead of just enduring it. And humanity had gained not just incredible knowledge, but the greatest teacher any species could hope for. The age of human expansion into the galaxy was about to begin, guided by the wisdom of those who had walked that path before them. 6 months later, the research station was complete. Prefabricated buildings surrounded the ancient ruins in a careful pattern that respected the sacred nature of the site while providing modern facilities for the growing team of scientists and diplomats who had come to learn from Kethvar. Pete walked through the morning mist toward the crystal chamber, carrying his tennis ball as he did every day. It had become a ritual. Their morning game helped Kethvar start each day with a moment of simple joy before diving into the complex work of teaching humanity about Zephyrian knowledge. "Good morning, old friend," Pete said as he approached the Guardian. Kethvar made a pleased rumbling sound and extended a tentacle to receive the tennis ball. Over the months, their daily games had evolved into an elaborate dance of tosses, catches, and playful tricks that never failed to make both of them happy. But today, Pete noticed something different. Kethvar seemed tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. "What's wrong?" Pete asked, using their mental connection to probe deeper. Through the link, Pete felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction, pride, and underneath it all, a deep weariness that had been growing stronger each day. "The teaching is going well," Kethvar's thoughts whispered in Pete's mind. "Your scientists learn quickly. Dr. Santos has almost mastered the basic healing techniques. Dr. Chen's understanding of our energy systems grows daily. Your engineers are beginning to grasp how we shape matter at the molecular level." "That's wonderful," Pete replied. "So why do you seem sad?" Kethvar's response came slowly, weighted with 60,000 years of patience finally reaching its end. "I am proud of what humanity is becoming, but I am also ready." Pete felt his heart clench. He had known this day would come, but he had hoped it was still far in the future. Over the past months, Kethvar had been gradually transferring more and more of his guardian duties to the human researchers. The crystal's security systems now recognized several humans as authorized users. The knowledge transfer protocols had been established and tested. Soon, Kethvar's presence would no longer be essential to the process. "How long?" Pete asked quietly. "Soon," Kethvar replied. "When the next group of your scholars arrives next month, I will begin the final transfer. The crystal will accept human guardianship, and my promise will be fulfilled." Pete tried to hide his grief, but their mental connection made that impossible. Kethvar sensed his friend's pain and sent a wave of gentle comfort through the link. "Do not mourn for me," the Guardian's thoughts said warmly. "I have lived far longer than any being should. More importantly, I have seen my people's legacy find worthy inheritors. I have watched humans begin to grow into the wisdom they will need, to use our gifts responsibly. And I have gained something I never expected: true friendship." That evening, Pete called his team together to share Kethvar's decision. The news hit everyone hard. Over the months, they had all grown to love the gentle giant who had become their teacher and guide. "There has to be something we can do," Lisa protested. "Some way to let him live independently without the crystal's connection." Alex had been working on that exact problem for weeks. "I've studied the transformation process extensively. Theoretically, we could modify it to allow him to survive without the crystal's energy, but—" "But what?" Jake asked. "The modification would essentially make him human. His enhanced abilities, his extended lifespan, his connection to Zephyrian technology. All of that would be lost. He would become mortal again." "Have you discussed this with him?" Pete asked. "Yes. He's not interested. He wants to join his people in whatever comes after death, not become something other than what he is." Jake stared out the window at the crystal's glow. "So we're really going to lose him?" "He doesn't see it as a loss," Pete said. "He sees it as completion. The fulfillment of a promise that has defined his entire existence." Over the next few weeks, as they prepared for the final transfer, Kethvar began sharing his most personal memories with Pete. Through their mental link, Pete experienced the Guardian's life from the beginning, his youth among the Zephyrians, his decision to volunteer for the transformation, the long, lonely years of waiting, and finally the joy of finding worthy inheritors. "I want you to understand," Kethvar explained during one of these sessions, "that this is not an ending. It is a beginning. My people's knowledge will live on through humanity. Our wisdom will guide your growth among the stars. Our dreams will become your achievements. But we'll miss you," Pete said simply. "And I will miss you," Kethvar replied. "But friendship transcends death. The bond we have formed will endure in the choices you make, the kindness you show, the wisdom you demonstrate. Every time humanity chooses compassion over cruelty, you will honor my memory." The day of the final transfer arrived with gray skies and heavy rain. Representatives from Earth had arrived to witness the historic moment when humanity would officially inherit the Zephyrian legacy. Ambassador Sarah Williams stood with Captain Rodriguez and the senior research team as Pete made his final approach to the crystal chamber. Kethvar waited beside the crystal, his massive form somehow seeming smaller than usual. Pete could feel the Guardian's mixture of anticipation and regret through their mental link. "Are you ready?" Pete asked. I have been ready for 60,000 years, Kethvar replied, but now that the moment has come, I find myself reluctant to leave you. Pete placed his hand on the Guardian's scaled arm. You're not leaving us. You're entrusting us with something precious. We won't let you down. Kethvar placed one massive hand on the crystal's surface and gestured for Pete to do the same. As their hands touched the glowing surface together, the crystal blazed with brilliant light. Through the connection, Pete felt the vast weight of Zephyrian knowledge flowing into human consciousness. But more than knowledge, he felt the love and hope that Kethvar's people had poured into their final gift to the universe. The transfer took hours. When it was complete, the crystal's glow had changed from blue to a warm golden color that seemed to pulse in rhythm with human heartbeats. Kethvar stepped back from the crystal and swayed slightly. The connection that had sustained him for millennia was broken. Pete caught him as he began to fall, his enhanced strength barely enough to support the Guardian's massive weight. Thank you, Kethvar whispered through their fading mental link. Thank you for showing me that duty can become friendship, that guardianship can become love, that endings can become beginnings. As the sun set through the clearing rain, Kethvar closed his 6 eyes for the final time. But his face wore an expression of perfect peace, the look of someone who had finally completed the most important task of his life. Pete held his friend as the great Guardian's life faded away, knowing that humanity had just inherited not only incredible knowledge, but an enormous responsibility to prove themselves worthy of the sacrifice that had been made for them. The age of human galactic civilization was about to begin, built on a foundation of friendship between species and guided by the wisdom of those who had walked among the stars, long before humanity ever dreamed of leaving Earth. With the communication crystal, everything changed. Pete could now speak directly with Kethvar, sharing thoughts and emotions in ways that words could never convey. The Guardian's relief at finally having someone to talk with was so intense that Pete sometimes had to break the connection just to catch his breath. It's like he's been holding back 60,000 years' worth of conversation, Pete told his teammates. The loneliness was eating him alive, but he couldn't abandon his duty. Through their mental link, Pete learned the full truth about the crystal and what it contained. The Zephyrian legacy wasn't just knowledge, it was wisdom. The difference, Kethvar explained, was crucial. Knowledge could be stolen or misused. Wisdom had to be earned through understanding and growth. The crystal would only release its contents to a species that had proven they could handle the responsibility that came with such power. What kind of responsibility? Jake asked. Pete closed his eyes, accessing the memories Kethvar had shared with him. The Zephyrians' technology could solve almost any problem. Unlimited clean energy, instantaneous travel between stars, the ability to heal any disease or repair any injury. But they also learned that such power could corrupt those who weren't ready for it. So they set up this test, Alex said. Leave the crystal with a guardian who would evaluate any species that found it. Not just evaluate, Pete corrected. Kethvar has been waiting for a species that would treat him as a friend rather than an obstacle to overcome. The Zephyrians believed that any species capable of showing compassion to their guardian would be capable of using their legacy wisely. Lisa looked up from her translation work. Have we passed the test? Pete was quiet for a moment, consulting with Kethvar through their mental link. He's impressed with how we've treated him, but he needs to see more. The test isn't just about our team. It's about humanity as a whole. What does that mean? Jake asked. He wants to meet more humans. He needs to understand our species, our values, our potential for both good and evil. Only then can he decide if we're worthy of the Zephyrian inheritance. Jake felt a chill of responsibility. The decision he made next could determine the future of human civilization. He could call for backup from the venture, bring down more personnel for Kethvar to evaluate. But what if humanity failed the test? What if the Guardian decided humans weren't ready for such power? "There's something else," Pete said quietly. "The process of transferring the crystal's contents will end Kethvar's guardianship. He's been sustained by his connection to the crystal for all these years. When that connection is broken, he'll die," Alex finished. Pete nodded. He's ready for it. More than ready. He's been holding on to fulfill his promise. But he's tired, Jake. 60,000 years tired. "But you said the transformation process might be reversible," Jake protested. "Maybe. But Kethvar doesn't want it reversed. He wants to join his people in whatever comes after death. He's been waiting for that reunion as much as he's been waiting to fulfill his duty." Jake stared toward the ruins, where the crystal's glow seemed brighter than usual. "So if we accept the inheritance, we lose our friend. And if we don't accept it," Lisa added, "humanity loses the greatest gift any species has ever been offered." The team spent the rest of the day in somber discussion. The weight of the decision was crushing. They were 4 humans on a distant planet, being asked to make a choice that would affect their entire species. That evening, Jake made his decision. "We call the venture. I want Captain Rodriguez and the senior staff down here tomorrow. If Kethvar is going to evaluate humanity, he should meet our best representatives." "What if they fail the test?" Alex asked. "Then we'll have learned something important about ourselves," Jake replied. The next day, a shuttle landed near their camp carrying Captain Maria Rodriguez and 5 of her senior officers. Jake had briefed them during the flight down, but seeing Kethvar in person was still a shock. "My God," breathed Dr. Elena Santos, the ship's chief medical officer. "He's magnificent." Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, her bearing military but respectful. "We're honored to meet you, Kethvar. Lieutenant, Morrison has told us about your people and your vigil." Kethvar studied the newcomers with his 6 eyes, then spoke through Pete's translation. "He says he's pleased to meet leaders of humanity. He wants to understand how we make decisions, how we treat those under our command, how we handle conflicts." What followed were 3 days of intense interaction. Kethvar questioned the humans about everything: their history, their values, their fears and hopes. He was particularly interested in humanity's conflicts and how they had learned to resolve differences without destroying each other. Captain Rodriguez spoke honestly about humanity's wars and mistakes, but also about their capacity for growth and learning. Dr. Santos shared examples of human compassion and the drive to heal rather than harm. The other officers contributed their own perspectives on human nature. Kethvar listened to everything, occasionally asking for clarification or requesting examples. Pete served as translator for the complex discussions, marveling at the Guardians' deep intelligence and wisdom. On the 3rd day, Kethvar made his decision. "He says humanity shows great promise," Pete translated, "but we're still young as a species. We have the capacity for both great good and great evil." Jake felt his heart sink. "We failed the test." "No," Pete said, consulting with Kethvar again. "We passed, but with conditions." The Guardian's proposal was unprecedented. Instead of simply transferring all Zephyrian knowledge to humanity at once, he would establish a gradual process. Humans would gain access to the crystal's contents slowly, as they proved they could handle each new level of responsibility. It's like a university, Pete explained. We'll learn step by step, earning each advancement through demonstration of wisdom rather than just intelligence. And who would oversee this process? Captain Rodriguez asked. Pete smiled. HFY. He's willing to remain as guardian and teacher, helping humanity grow into the inheritance we're being offered. But there was a catch. The process would require a permanent human presence on the planet. A team would have to stay behind to work with HFY, learning Zephyrian knowledge and passing it on to the rest of humanity at a responsible pace. Jake knew immediately who that team would be. "We'll stay," he said simply. "This is our discovery, our responsibility." Captain Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I'll recommend to command that we establish a research station here. This could be the most important scientific project in human history." That night, as they celebrated their success, Pete sat with HFY beside the crystal. Through their mental link, he could sense the Guardian's profound relief. After 60,000 years, his vigil was changing from one of lonely waiting to one of active teaching. "Are you sure about this?" Pete asked. "You could have joined your people long ago if you'd just let the crystal go dark." HFY's response came tinged with warmth and determination. He had made a promise to find worthy inheritors for his people's legacy. But now he had found something more. A new people to care for, to guide, to watch grow from promising youngsters into wise adults. For the first time in millennia, HFY was looking forward to the future instead of just enduring it. And humanity had gained not just incredible knowledge, but the greatest teacher any species could hope for. The age of human expansion into the galaxy was about to begin, guided by the wisdom of those who had walked that path before them.